Hi, my name is Shanda, and my father slapped me across the face at my own engagement party, just after telling the crowd I was never really his daughter. He threw a crumpled $20 bill at my feet like I was trash, and while blood trickled from my lip, all I could do was smile, because I knew something he didn't. I had been waiting for that exact moment for years. My real father was standing just outside the door. They lied to me my whole life, hid letters, forged documents, told me love had to be earned, painfully. But that night, everything changed. Ever wondered what it feels like when your whole family betrays you, publicly? What would you do if the man who raised you turns out to be your biggest enemy? Keep listening. You haven't heard the worst part yet. Cullen and I reached the restaurant a little before everyone else. He parked the car, gave my hand a small squeeze, and told me it would be fine. I nodded like I believed him. Inside, the private room was already arranged with round tables, soft lights, and the kind of decorations that felt more like a church fundraiser than a celebration. I tried to smile anyway. Tonight was supposed to be simple, calm, a step forward. My palms were slightly damp, so I reached for a paper napkin from the stack on the welcome table. I folded it once, then again. It was an old habit I'd carried since childhood, something I did whenever my nerves started stirring. Cullen noticed but didn't say anything. He never pushed. He just stayed close, steady in a way that helped me breathe. People trickled in over the next 20 minutes. Most were from Vaughn's side of the family, his cousins, his coworkers, people from church who'd watched me grow up but never really knew me. They greeted Cullen warmly. They greeted me like they had to. A polite nod, a thin smile, a quick glance down before stepping past me. I told myself it was nothing, but the room carried a strange tension, as if everyone had been told something I hadn't. Amina walked over first. Her smile stopped midway, like she'd changed her mind about offering it. "You look nice, Shanda." "Thanks," I said, pretending not to notice how she kept her arms folded. Celeste followed, offering a half-smile that felt painted on. Tilden didn't even bother with that. He just muttered, "Evening," and moved toward the buffet table. Cullen leaned close. "You okay?" "Yeah, just taking it in," I whispered. But the truth was clearer than I wanted to admit. The distance wasn't imagined. The whispers weren't in my head. The glances weren't accidental. Something was off, and everyone felt it except me. About 30 minutes in, Vaughn stepped to the front of the room. His presence always carried weight, but tonight it felt heavier, almost rehearsed. He tapped a spoon against his glass. Conversations stopped. Chairs shifted. Everyone turned toward him. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice calm but tight. "We're here to congratulate this young man." He lifted his glass toward Cullen. Just Cullen. My chest tightened. I took a slow breath, clutching the folded napkin in my palm. Cullen gently guided me forward, assuming Vaughn intended to include both of us. When I stepped beside him, the air changed. Vaughn's face hardened the moment his eyes met mine. The warmth he'd just shown Cullen vanished like it had never been there. "Before we celebrate," he said, louder now, "there's something she needs to hear." The room shifted again. Chairs creaked. Someone whispered, "What's he doing?" I barely had time to process the question before it happened. His hand came across my face with a sharp, explosive crack. The sound echoed through the room. I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of a table. A metallic tang hit my tongue as blood slipped across my lip. Gasps filled the air. Someone dropped a fork. A woman near the back covered her mouth. Vaughn reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, and tossed it at my feet. "Take it and get out. I'm done paying for another man's mistake." My vision pulsed. For a brief second, I felt like I was 10 years old again, small and powerless, trying to shrink so no one noticed the hurt. That same old fear crawled up my spine, the one I'd spent years trying to outrun. No one moved, not one person spoke up. The silence was its own kind of violence. I bent down, not for the money but to steady myself. My fingers brushed the napkin in my hand. I felt its soft edges, the creases I'd made minutes earlier, the way I used to fold paper just to hide that my hands were shaking. But this time I refused to shrink. I stood upright. I dabbed the blood from the corner of my mouth with that small napkin. Then I lifted my chin. "I see," I said quietly. My voice didn't tremble. "Well, then you should hear something too." I reached into my purse and pulled out a sealed envelope I'd carried for years. It was thin, carefully kept, and heavier than any weight he'd ever thrown at me. I held it out to him. "I know, Dad," I said, "and my real father is waiting outside." His face drained of color. His shoulders stiffened. His breath caught. He looked toward the entrance as if the truth itself had walked through the door. And when he turned toward the door, everyone else turned too. Not a word, not a whisper. Just a wall of breathless silence thick enough to choke on. The room had become a stage, and I was standing in the middle of it, bleeding and exposed. Through the entryway, under the flickering hallway light, stood the man I had only ever held in memories. Harlan. His frame was leaner now, shoulders narrower than I remembered. The dark curls I used to tug at from his lap had thinned and grayed, brushed neatly to the side. But his eyes, those didn't change. Deep-set, familiar, and searching the room like he was trying to recognize the little girl he'd left behind. My knees almost gave out. Something in me jolted back in time. I saw tiny flashes, him lifting me so I could see the Christmas parade, reading "Where the Wild Things Are" in a soft baritone that made bedtime feel sacred, laughing as I tried to keep up with his long stride in the park. Then it slammed into the memory of Vaughn, slamming a door, his voice slicing through the hallway. "He's gone. Forget him. You don't need people who disappear." And I did. For years, I convinced myself Harlan had vanished, that maybe I dreamed the warmth, that maybe Vaughn was right. He wasn't. Now here he was, at my engagement party. At the moment, my whole life cracked open. Nobody knew what to say. The crowd stood frozen, like a family photo gone stiff with confusion. I caught Amina whispering to Celeste. Tilden clenched his jaw so tight I could hear the teeth grind. Even Cullen took half a step closer behind me. Close enough for support, but not to block the view. Vaughn was the first to recover. Of course he was. He turned to the guests with the smug authority of someone used to controlling the script. "This is ridiculous," he barked, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "She's staging a scene, creating drama for attention again." He swept a hand in my direction, like I was a broken lamp he was tired of explaining. "She's always been this way, emotional, manipulative, trying to twist the truth when it doesn't go her way." Some of the guests nodded slowly, not out of belief, but out of habit. Conditioned loyalty. I'd seen it my whole life. Vaughn said it, so it must be true. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Shame flickered, but something else started to rise beneath it. A slow-burning fire I'd spent decades tamping down. Anger, righteous, simmering, overdue. Then I heard Harlan's voice. "Vaughn," he said plainly, "let her speak." Just that. Not loud, not threatening. But something in his tone shifted the air in the room. For the first time since I was a child, Vaughn didn't know what to say. His mouth parted slightly, then snapped shut. I tried to speak. I did. But the words got stuck somewhere between my throat and the ache in my chest. The napkin in my hand was still there, creased, warm from my grip, spotted now with red from my lip. I looked down at it like it might tell me how to breathe. For a moment, I wasn't 35. I was 9. I was holding a school note in my hand, standing in the hallway after being told not to talk back. I was afraid again, not of being hit, but of being silenced, of being told none of it mattered. I lifted my chin. Not here, Vaughn snapped, raising his hand slightly like he might shush me physically. You've embarrassed this family enough for one night. There it was, that voice, that tone, the one that turned grown adults into obedient children. A few guests shuffled back, discomfort written all over their faces. She's unstable, he said louder. We've all seen it. Years of outbursts. This is just another one of her performances. Don't let her ruin this night. Something cracked. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Cullen. She's not unstable, he said, voice calm but sharp. You hit her. In front of everyone. We all saw it. The silence snapped. Gasps. A few eyes dropped. Others looked away completely, suddenly remembering the sound of the slap, the $20, the way I bent to steady myself. I watched it happen, recognition dawning like a fog lifting. Harlan stepped forward, his eyes never leaving mine. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than before, but somehow louder than anything in the room. You don't have to hide anymore. I nearly crumbled, not because of what he said, but because it was exactly what I'd needed to hear since the moment I learned how to stay quiet to survive. That sentence broke through something inside me that had been locked away with a key I never thought I'd find again. Vaughn's face twisted, his neck flushed red, jaw set so tight I thought his molars would crack. If you walk out with him, he said, voice low and sharp, you walk out of this family. That sentence. Again. He'd said it when I was 13 and asked about the letters Harlan sent. He said it when I was 20 and tried to apply for college out of state. And he was saying it now, one more time, for control. But this time something changed in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. I looked down at the $20 still lying crumpled on the floor. Then I turned my head slowly toward the hallway, where Harlan waited, shoulders steady, hands at his sides, offering no demand, just space. And the room held its breath. And for the first time in my life, I realized the door wasn't just an exit, it was a choice. I stepped through it. The moment the door shut behind us, the noise from the party dulled like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. The hallway outside was quiet, the overhead lights humming faintly. There was a faint smell of bleach and something fried wafting in from the kitchen around the corner. It hit me then, how ridiculous it was that, after everything, this confrontation was unfolding next to a mop bucket and a tray of half-eaten mozzarella sticks. I felt cracked open, like everyone inside that room had seen parts of me I didn't even know I'd been hiding. My heart was thudding, palms still damp. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or just sit down on the tiled floor and disappear into it. Harlan stood a few feet away, just watching. Not staring like he was inspecting damage. Watching like someone who's just found something he'd long thought lost. You look like your mother, he said. I don't know why that undid me, but it did. The words dropped into me like a stone falling into a still pond, slow, heavy, creating ripple after ripple I couldn't stop. I had no response. I just stared at him, blinking too fast. His voice. God, his voice. It tugged something loose. I remembered sitting on a shaggy green carpet, stacking wooden blocks while he guided my tiny hands. Like that, sweet pea, nice and steady. He'd been laughing softly, one of those chest-deep chuckles that made everything feel safe. And then, like a thunderclap, Vaughn's voice tore through the hallway. Get out! You don't belong here! And just like that, the memory warped. The blocks fell. The warmth vanished. I saw myself at the kitchen table, my little hands folding a paper napkin into neat squares. I hadn't realized until right then. It was that night. That was the first time I folded something just to keep my hands from shaking, to stay quiet, to not cry. I'd been folding fear ever since. I looked down, still holding one. Why didn't you come back? My voice was smaller than I wanted it to be. Harlan's expression shifted. There was pain behind it, deep, old pain. I tried, he said quietly. Every year. He told your mother you didn't want to see me. After she passed, he told me you blamed me. Something snapped inside me, sharp and slow. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was grief, thick and slow-moving, sliding up from somewhere dark and neglected. I believed him, I whispered. I was 7 and I believed him. He stepped closer, but not too close. I know. I remembered Vaughn saying, so matter-of-factly, he left you. People like that don't come back, and don't ask again. And I didn't. I had folded napkins and feelings for decades after that. A door creaked somewhere behind us. I turned. Cullen had followed. He paused, unsure if he should be here. His eyes scanned my face, searching. You okay? He asked. Do you want me to stay? For once, I didn't want to go through this alone. I nodded. Yeah, stay. He stepped to my side, gently brushed his hand against mine. I could feel him holding back his instincts to fix everything. He was just being present. And that was enough. I turned back to Harlan. What happened to her? To my mom? His jaw tightened. She was trying to leave. She'd finally gotten the courage. She told me she was going to take you and go. Said she couldn't raise a daughter in a house full of lies and fear. I swallowed hard. But Vaughn, he found out? He made sure she knew what it would cost. He told her he'd cut her off, that he'd take you away. She believed him. My stomach turned. And when she died, I said slowly, you were just gone. He nodded, reluctantly. I tried to come to the funeral. He had people block me at the door. Later, I heard he'd told folks I'd been out of your life for years, that you wanted nothing to do with me. He was rewriting everything before I even had the chance to show up. The ache in my chest grew deeper. It wasn't just about Harlan. It was about years of lost truth, lost chances. A girl growing up in a house full of judgment and shame, thinking she'd been discarded. From the other side of the door, muffled voices started to rise. She's always been dramatic, someone scoffed. Maybe he's not even her real father, another muttered. I closed my eyes for a beat. Cullen heard it too. He shifted, placing himself slightly between me and the door. A protective gesture that made my throat tighten. Why now? I asked, my voice barely audible. Harlan exhaled slowly. Because you reached out. I blinked. What? You sent a letter. A birthday card, I think. You didn't know it, but you mailed it to the old post office box I kept in Wichita. I still checked it, once or twice a year, just in case. My heart skipped. A few months ago, I'd written something on a whim, a birthday card I never meant to send. Just a message to the universe, or maybe to myself. I wrote his name without thinking, poured out words I'd never said aloud, then dropped it in the mail like a secret. I figured it would end up in a dead letter bin somewhere. But he got it, and he came. I stared at him, barely breathing. You still had that address? I asked. I never let it go. Just then, his eyes shifted, not toward me, over my shoulder. He's coming, Harlan said. I turned. The doorknob rattled. The moment Vaughn stepped through the doorway, everything in the hallway seemed to stiffen. His shoulders were squared like armor, jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from stone. He didn't say a word to Harlan or Cullen. He didn't even glance at them. His eyes locked on mine, cold and unwavering. We're leaving, he said flatly, like a command more than a suggestion. His voice was smooth, too smooth. I'd heard that tone before, when he was trying to keep up appearances while anger boiled just beneath the surface. It was the same voice he used with teachers, neighbors, and church folk, the respectable father voice. But I could see it now for what it was, a mask. He reached for my arm. I didn't move. I wasn't a child anymore, and something inside me had shifted, just slightly, but enough to root me to the ground. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. His jaw twitched. He turned to Harlan then, finally acknowledging him. "You need to leave this property before I call the police and report harassment." Cullen stepped forward without hesitation, placing himself just slightly in front of me. He didn't speak yet, just stood like a wall, solid and grounded. Harlan didn't flinch. "I was invited," Vaughn scoffed, shaking his head like the whole situation bored him. "You don't know what you're doing," he muttered, then aimed his words at me. "He doesn't belong here. None of this does." "I asked him to come," I said, louder this time. Vaughn's face went pale, then flushed with color. "You don't know what you're saying." He took a step closer. "This is what she does," he said, now speaking to the hallway, to anyone within earshot. "She creates chaos. She lies. She's always been this way." More people had started drifting toward the door. Amina, Celeste, and Tilden hovered in the background. Their faces said everything: uncertainty, discomfort, curiosity. Vaughn's voice sharpened. "She's unstable. Has been for years. Ask anyone. Emotional, dramatic, always twisting things to get attention." I felt heat rising in my chest, but it wasn't panic. It was clarity. Harlan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I have something to show you," he said. "Proof that Vaughn forged your mother's signature years ago, on documents that blocked me from ever contacting you." The words hit like a dropped brick. Someone at the door whispered, "That can't be true." I watched Vaughn's face. For just a second, just a flicker, his expression cracked. And that was enough. My memory jolted. I saw myself at 8 years old, sitting by the window with my little pink backpack on, waiting. "He didn't show," Vaughn had said. "That's who he is." But he had shown. He'd been locked out. Vaughn took a deep breath and raised his voice again, this time with venom. "None of this matters. She's been unstable since she was a teenager. Ask anyone. Here. She's ungrateful, irrational, never satisfied." Around us, people shuffled. No one spoke, no one agreed, no one dared. And yet, no one defended him. Cullen broke the silence. "She's not unstable," he said. "She's finally standing up to the man who's controlled her for most of her life." It was quiet, but it landed like thunder. Heads turned. Amina leaned toward Celeste and whispered something. Celeste didn't nod or frown, just stared. Tilden looked down, shoulders dropping like something heavy had finally settled on him. I took a slow breath and said, "Stop calling me unstable." Vaughn went silent, not because he'd backed down, but because it surprised him. He wasn't used to me talking back in front of an audience. "You want to throw away everything I've done for you?" he snapped. "If you think this man is your father, then you're about to lose everything." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "You walk away with him. You walk out of this family." That line, that old line. He'd used it for 20 years, like a leash. But it didn't work anymore. I didn't say a word, just stood there, feeling something solid and unfamiliar forming inside me. Not rage, not revenge, just resolution. Harlan stepped closer and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You haven't heard everything yet," he said gently. Vaughn's eyes widened, panic showing in the smallest shift of his jawline. And I knew whatever came next was going to shatter the rest of his carefully built story. And in that moment, I realized the next truth would destroy the story Vaughn built around my entire childhood. I didn't look away from him, not even when my legs felt like they might give out again. Something in his expression had shifted. His usual calm, smug certainty wasn't there anymore. He looked cornered, and that was new. Harlan reached into his coat and slowly unfolded an envelope, careful like he was holding something sacred. His fingers trembled just slightly, but his voice was steady. "Before your mother passed," he began, "she tried to reach me. She wanted you to know something, but the letter never made it." I held my breath. That tight ache in my chest returned, the kind I used to feel as a kid whenever Vaughn told me not to ask questions. Harlan pulled out two things, an old digital recorder and a small USB drive in a zip bag. Cullen moved closer to him and offered his phone. "You can plug it in here." Vaughn stepped forward fast, too fast. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "You're letting strangers stir up lies at your engagement?" But Cullen had already connected the drive. The audio began before Vaughn could snatch it away. The voice that came through was shaky but unmistakable. "My mother. If something happens to me," she said, "please find Shanda. She needs someone steady. Vaughn, he's pulling her away from me little by little. If you hear this, please, don't give up on her." My knees buckled. Cullen caught me with one arm, steadying me. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the tears hit my chest. Amina gasped softly behind me. Celeste covered her mouth. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't the problem. Vaughn stepped forward again, frantic now. "That recording is fake. It's taken out of context. You people have no idea what she was dealing with near the end. She was confused, grieving, delusional." He said it all too fast, like he'd rehearsed it. I looked at him, not through him, for the first time in my life. And all I saw was fear, hiding behind anger. Harlan pulled one more paper from the envelope. "There's more." It was a photocopy of a note, handwritten in slanted cursive, my mother's writing. "I opened a small trust for Shanda today," it read. "Nothing large, but enough for when she turns 25. If something happens to me, I want it to go to her directly." There was a date at the bottom, a few months before she died. Then Harlan showed us the bank document, the account closure, signed entirely by Vaughn. No record of my signature, no authorization from anyone else. Gasps swept through the group standing in the doorway. I couldn't breathe right. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was underwater. My fingers were numb. My chest felt hollow. I managed a whisper, "Why would you do that to her?" Vaughn just stood there, arms crossed, not a word. I couldn't feel my legs. My memories twisted around me like vines, his lectures masked as life lessons, his punishments served up as fatherly discipline, and every time he told me, "I'm the only one who ever stayed." Had I really been protecting him all these years? Was I defending the man who stole from my mother, who lied about my father, who turned my whole life into a performance I didn't know I was in? More guests pulled back from Vaughn. Amina stepped away entirely. Celeste turned her head. Even Tilden, who had been stone-faced all night, lowered his eyes and shifted behind the others. My stomach churned. My head spun. I stumbled slightly and pressed my back to the wall, then slid down until I was sitting half on the floor, half on my heels. I wasn't crying anymore, just trying to stay upright. Cullen crouched beside me, his hand on my arm. "Breathe, Shan," he said gently. "You're okay. I got you." His voice was the only thing grounding me. Vaughn's voice cut through again, sharp and cruel. "Look at her, falling apart just like always. This is why I had to be hard on her. She can't handle anything. She cracks under pressure." My body burned with shame, not because he was right, but because I had once believed every word of that. I'd carried those lies like they were truth, sewn into my skin. I lifted my head, my breath shaky but steady enough to speak. What else did you take from her? The hallway went silent. Vaughn didn't answer. He couldn't. And in that silence, I heard something louder than all his shouting, his unraveling. And the silence told me there was far more buried than anyone wanted to admit. I braced against the hallway wall, dragging in shallow breaths while trying to keep my knees from giving out again. Cullen's hand remained steady on my shoulder, but I hated how visible my unraveling had become. Part of me wanted to vanish, to slip out the back, avoid every glance, every whisper, but another part was just done. Done hiding, done covering, done being the girl who made herself small so no one else would have to be uncomfortable. Then, from the crowd, Tilden stepped forward. His eyes were bloodshot, shoulders sagging. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, like the truth had aged him 10 years in 10 minutes. Your mother told me to watch over you, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. I stared at him, throat tightening. Then why didn't you? Before he could answer, Vaughn shot back. It wasn't your place. His tone was dismissive, sharp, like Tilden was a child who'd stepped out of line. The tension in the room thickened again, just as a few phones buzzed at once. I heard a murmur, someone behind me saying, "Is that her?" Cullen's phone lit up. He frowned as he read something, then held the screen out for me to see. There it was, a post on some local social media gossip thread. A concerned family member speaks out. How emotional instability turned a celebration into chaos. It didn't name me outright, but it didn't have to. The photo attached, snapped seconds ago, was unmistakably me in the hallway, my face caught mid-collapse. The writing was slick, calculated, emotionally manipulative. I didn't need a signature to know who wrote it. Why are you doing this? I asked, turning to Vaughn. He didn't blink. To protect our family's reputation from your recklessness. There it was again, that chilling, calculated calm he always used when the knife was twisting in deep. Then a woman entered from the side door, mid-50s, navy pantsuit, composed. I recognized her, old family accountant. She held a piece of paper in a plastic folder. Your father said you requested this to be shared, she said, glancing toward me with uncertainty. Vaughn nodded, smugly. She handed it to me. It was a withdrawal form, from the trust. My name was on it, a signature that to anyone else might have looked like mine. But it wasn't. My stomach lurched. That's not my handwriting, I whispered. Vaughn stepped closer. Then who else would have done it? He said flatly. I looked down at the page again, then back at him. My hands didn't shake this time. This wasn't just spur of the moment. He planned this, years ago, layered it, sealed it in a file somewhere, just in case. My voice was even, calm. I'd like to compare that signature to the mortgage paperwork you signed last year. He froze. I keep digital copies, I added. The accountant shifted on her feet. Vaughn's eyes flicked toward her, then back to me. If the signatures match, I said, then you forged my name on a legal trust document. There was a sharp intake of breath from someone in the crowd. He clenched his jaw. You don't know what you're talking about. But his voice cracked. Barely, but it cracked. Cullen stepped forward, his tone cool and crisp. We can have it reviewed by someone qualified. That shook Vaughn more than anything else. It wasn't just me anymore. Cullen had a way of saying things like they were already done deals. Then, in a flash, Vaughn yanked the paper from the accountant's hands. Before anyone could react, he tried to tear it in half. Cullen lunged and caught his wrist mid-air. The sudden motion startled the entire hallway. Gasps. A chair scraped against the wall. Someone dropped a wineglass in the background. You're ruining everything, Vaughn shouted. No, someone said quietly from the crowd. You already did that yourself. Another voice behind me. Why would you lie about your own daughter? The tide had turned. You could feel it in the air. The room didn't believe him anymore. I took one step forward, my voice low but firm. This ends tonight, I said. No more lies, no more stories, no more control. He stared at me, and for the first time in my life, he looked unsure. He looked like a man who'd written himself into a corner and didn't know how to rewrite the ending. He leaned in close, his voice cold and sharp. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "You haven't even seen what I kept from you." Every muscle in my body tensed. And then he reached into his jacket, pulling out something that made the entire hallway fall silent. It wasn't a weapon, though in a way it might as well have been. Vaughn unfolded a wrinkled sheet of paper with slow, practiced flair, like it had been waiting in that pocket for this exact moment. His eyes locked onto mine, filled with the same smug triumph I used to see when I came home late and he stood waiting by the door. "This," he announced, holding it up between two fingers, "is the truth I've carried for 18 years. I felt my stomach tighten, like something cold had just settled in it. I didn't know what I was about to hear, but every instinct told me it wasn't good. The room quieted further. Even the music drifting in from the ballroom seemed to fade. Guests pressed closer, the weight of their curiosity thick in the air. I felt Cullen shift beside me, protective. Amina gasped softly and brought her hand to her chest. Vaughn held up the paper like it was a trophy. "This is the petition your mother filed," he said. "She asked the court to remove me from your life." The sound that came from the crowd wasn't just surprise, it was shock laced with unease. My own ears rang. The words didn't land right away. They bounced around in my head before they pierced through. "She filed—" "What?" I asked, barely hearing my own voice. He didn't flinch. "She wanted me out, said I wasn't fit, said she wanted someone else, someone like him." His arm swept toward the doorway where Harlan now stood frozen. "To raise you." I couldn't breathe for a second. My legs wobbled, but I forced them to stay still. She never told me, not once. Not even in her final letters, her scribbled notes, her dreams for me. She carried this burden alone. But as soon as the thought surfaced, another followed, sharper, clearer. She wasn't trying to destroy my relationship with Vaughn. She was trying to save me from it. Vaughn stepped closer and jabbed the paper toward me like it was a blade. "Legally, you were never mine. I fought it. I kept you only because the court denied her request. And now you repay me like this?" His voice cracked, not with emotion, but with something darker, resentment. The hallway spun for a moment. My sense of identity, the foundation I had clung to even in our worst moments, began to crumble. From behind me, someone murmured, "Who says that to their own child?" Celeste was crying openly now. "Shan, don't listen to him," she whispered. I couldn't look at her. I was afraid if I saw her face, I'd fall apart. "So all these years," I started, but Vaughn cut me off. "A burden," he snapped. "That's what you were. A burden I never asked for." Something inside me buckled, and still, I stayed standing. That's when a man in a gray suit approached, one of the venue managers. His face was tight with discomfort. "Excuse me, ma'am. Mr. Hayes says you're creating a disturbance," he said quietly. My throat tightened. I knew what was coming. Vaughn waved 2 security guards over like he'd done it before. "Escort her out. She's unstable. This event doesn't need any more of her outbursts." A new round of gasps surged like static through the room. Cullen stepped in front of me so fast it startled the guards. "You lay a hand on her," he said, "and you'll be meeting with our attorney by morning." Even the guards hesitated. My heart raced, but something shifted in me. Snapped, maybe. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I straightened, wiped my face with the back of my hand, and looked Vaughn in the eye. "Before anyone escorts anyone," I said, calm and cold, "you should hear what my mother actually said about you." I pulled out my phone. My hands didn't tremble this time. I tapped the audio file Harlan had given me. Her voice poured into the hallway, soft and shaking. "Vaughn, he scares her. He breaks her spirit. I don't want him raising her alone." Silence followed. Real silence. Not a sound, not a whisper. Just the weight of a truth too heavy to deny. Vaughn's face drained of color. He tried to speak, but his lips moved faster than his words. She was ill," he stammered. "Delusional. You can't trust—" But even his voice knew it was over. People stepped back. Someone in the crowd said, "Enough." Even the guards looked away from him. I stepped forward slowly, every word measured. "You didn't keep me," I said. "You trapped me." That line, that truth, hung in the air like a knife balanced on edge. Vaughn looked around, frantic, but the allies he'd always counted on were gone. Even Tilden stood at a distance now, arms crossed, shame written all over his face. Then, Vaughn's face twisted. He crumpled the paper in his hand and held it up like a torch. "Fine," he barked. "You want the truth?" He looked at me, wild-eyed. "Your mother lied to you about everything." The room spun sideways. He leaned in, voice low and bitter. "And I can prove it." He reached into his jacket again, pulling out something thicker, something that made my stomach drop before I even saw it. It was a worn manila folder, its corners bent and edges soft with age. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, were the words, "For Shanda, when she's ready." I stopped breathing. Vaughn held it high like it was a weapon. His hand shook slightly, either from anger or adrenaline. I couldn't tell which. His voice was loud and bitter. "She didn't want you to see these. She doubted him. She doubted you. These prove it." He tossed the folder onto a table with theatrical disdain. The flap loosened and envelopes spilled out, sliding across the polished wood. Cullen was already moving, gathering them before they hit the ground. Amina stepped forward, her eyes wide. "Oh my God," she whispered. "She wrote so many." My hands moved before my thoughts did. I picked up the first envelope, saw the careful curve of her handwriting, and opened it with trembling fingers. "My sweet girl," it began. "One day you'll understand why I tried to protect you." I felt the breath hitch in my chest. "I'm sorry he isolates you. I'm sorry he tells you love must be earned. It isn't. Not from me." My knees nearly gave out. The room seemed to lean sideways as I read her words. Every sentence felt like a balm and a wound at the same time. There was no bitterness in her tone, no accusation. Only love, real, desperate love, the kind that tries even when it's already lost. "She feared him," someone whispered behind me. Vaughn's face twitched. His mouth moved, but no sound came. His eyes weren't smug anymore. They were searching, unsure, like he was watching a fire he started burn out of control. I reached back into the folder. There was more. A printout of an email chain. My mother writing to Harlan, begging him to meet her before her surgery. She wanted to tell him the truth. She wanted to fix what had been broken. Harlan stepped forward. His voice was hoarse. "She was going to bring me back into your life." "No," Vaughn barked suddenly. "No, that's not what happened. She was confused. She didn't know what she wanted." His voice was starting to crack. Not with grief, but with the strain of holding together a story that no longer held weight. From the far end of the room, Mrs. Tolbert, Celeste's mother, stepped forward, calm, unshaken. "I was with your mother the week before she passed," she said. "She begged Vaughn to let her speak to you alone. He wouldn't let her." The crowd shifted again, more whispers. more eyes turning away from him. "You're lying," Vaughn snapped. "You hated her. You hated me." But the voice that rose next was unfamiliar, an older nurse, standing near the back. "Your mother told me he intercepted her letters," she said. "She said he wouldn't let her send anything unless he read it first." Silence dropped hard. I looked at the letters again. Years of them, all hidden, all smothered. "You kept these from me," I said, stepping forward, voice low but steady. Years of her love, years of her trying to reach me. Why? Vaughn didn't answer. "You didn't want me to know someone else could love me without rules, without punishment, without making me feel like I was broken." His hands curled into fists, his jaw clenched, and then, like a man undone, he lunged toward the table. "You don't deserve them," he shouted. Cullen was faster. He pushed Vaughn back with one hand and shielded me with the other. Security moved in, holding Vaughn by both arms. He thrashed, wild-eyed. "I raised you," he screamed. "You owe me everything." I didn't blink. "I owe you nothing you tried to take from me." Then I reached for the final paper in the folder, one I hadn't seen yet, tucked between two envelopes. It was notarized, signed by my mother, dated just weeks before she died. "If anything happens to me," it read, "please give Shanda the choice to know her father. She deserves the truth, even if Vaughn disagrees." Gasps echoed through the hallway. Vaughn's knees buckled slightly. His body sagged in the guard's grip. "She wasn't supposed to leave this behind," he whispered, more to himself than to any of us. And for the first time, I saw it. Not rage, not control. Just a man who knew he'd lost the last piece of power he had left. I pressed the letters to my chest. My hands were steady. My spine was straight. "You hid her love from me," I said quietly. "You hid who I am." He looked at me, eyes hollow. "I did what I had to." I leaned closer. "So will I." There was nothing more to say. The guards released him as if the weight of the room had shifted. Guests stepped back like he carried something contagious. The hallway, once filled with tension, now buzzed with the aftershock of truth. And then Harlan stepped beside me. He rested a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Shanda," he said, his voice soft, steady. "There's something else you need to know. Something she told me the night before she died." I turned to him, heart in my throat. I felt my pulse roar in my ears as he reached into his coat pocket, retrieving something small enough to fit in his palm. Harlan stepped closer and opened his hand. Resting in his broad palm was a delicate gold pendant, oval-shaped, warm with age. I knew it the second I saw it, my mother's. I didn't even need to touch it to feel its weight. I remembered it resting against her collarbone, the way she used to rub her thumb over it when she was deep in thought. "She gave this to me," Harlan said softly. "Told me to return it when you were ready." I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "Ready for what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gently pried open the clasp. Inside was a small, folded piece of paper, aged and creased, but carefully preserved. He handed it to me, and I unfolded it with trembling fingers. "My girl, if you're reading this, you found the strength I prayed for." That was all it said. And yet, it was everything. Tears welled up, but they weren't from heartbreak. Not anymore. They came from something quieter, recognition, relief, the feeling of being seen. "She said Vaughn would never let you go," Harlan said after a moment. "Not unless you chose to walk away. She hoped someday you would." The words didn't strike like lightning. They didn't pierce. They simply landed, soft and final, like the way a curtain falls after the last scene, a quiet ending to something loud and long. Behind me, Vaughn had slumped to the floor, leaning against the hallway wall. His head was bowed, his hands limp at his sides. No one went to him. No one spoke his name. "I only did what I thought was right," he murmured to no one in particular. I stood still for a long moment, watching him, and then I knelt, not to comfort him, not to reach out, but to look him in the eye one last time. "You can explain it to someone else," I said, even in calm. "I'm choosing myself now." He looked up. His eyes were wet, but it wasn't remorse I saw. It was emptiness. And I didn't need to fill it anymore. Celeste's mother was already speaking with the venue staff, recounting everything. The accountant stepped forward, steady in her stance. "The document was forged," she said firmly. "It needs to go to the authorities." Vaughn didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just sat there, sinking deeper into whatever hole he'd dug himself into over the years. Cullen helped me to my feet. Amina gathered the rest of the letters and slipped them gently into my bag. Around us, the energy had shifted. The tension that once pulsed in the air was gone. In its place was something quieter, still. Like my mother had finally stepped into the room and taken her seat at last. Not as a memory, but as truth. Harlan approached, his voice soft. "Can we start over?" he asked. "Not as strangers this time." I nodded. "One step at a time," I said. "But yes." We stood there for a beat, not rushing, just allowing the quiet to settle in. Then I turned back to Vaughn. He didn't look up. "I won't hate you," I said. My voice was low, not from weakness, but from control. "But I won't let you keep defining me." He flinched, just slightly, but he didn't respond. Cullen took my hand as we began walking toward the exit. The hallway had emptied out. The noise from the ballroom had faded to nothing. The doors ahead opened to the night, cool air sweeping in, clean and honest. Outside, in the lot, the cars were still lined up neatly under the streetlights. A few guests lingered, murmuring in small groups. Harlan followed behind us, then caught up, gently pressing a small envelope into my hand. "These are the rest," he said. "You read them when you're ready. There's no rush." I nodded, unable to speak. I held the envelope close. "I survived," I whispered to myself. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't proud or loud. It was just true. I reached into my coat pocket, feeling for the pendant again. My thumb ran over the smooth gold. I closed my eyes for a moment. This time, I thought, I will choose the life I want. Not the life shaped by fear. Not the life dictated by Vaughn's lies or silence. Later that night, back in my small living room with the quiet hum of the heater and the soft rustle of the curtains, I sat curled on my couch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The envelope rested in my lap. I opened the second letter. "You are more than the story they tried to write for you." I stared at the words, my chest rising slowly with every breath. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just let the words be, more than the story. I closed my eyes, pressing the pendant to my chest. For a moment, I imagined her hand over mine. "I'm ready, Mom," I whispered. Finally,